it is important to consider, I mean, in terms of the new administration coming in, what financing challenges have plagued the agricultural value chain in Nigeria so far, and to consider the effectiveness of the current government policies and what we need to do going forward. And more importantly, this is a question we get asked all the time. Everyone wants to know, what are the financing opportunities for the agri sector, and how can we harness these opportunities? We have excellent speakers on this topic today who have extensive experience within the agricultural value chain. And I believe that at the end of the session, many of the questions that have plagued us, even as a committee, and our members will be dealt with. Now, before I introduce the moderator for today's session, I am happy to announce the presence of the chairperson of the NBA-SBL, Dr. Adeoye Adefulu, who has taken time out of his hectic schedule to join us today. I now welcome Dr. Adefulu to give us some opening remarks before we continue. Thank you, Dr. Adefulu.
Pranami, thank you. Thank you to all the panel, the speakers, and to the members of the Agri Committee. It is truly a pleasure. I don't consider it taking time out of my schedule. I'm very pleased to be here. It's a pleasure to join the session and to listen to the esteemed speakers that are going to be on. I would also like to thank the audience. Thank you for always attending the SBL Business Law Weekly. We're looking forward to a robust discussion on this important topic of financing, and hopefully we'll take some tips away and put something together for the incoming government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Adefulu. And I will now like to introduce the moderator, who is the Vice Chairperson of the Agri Committee, Aderonke Alex Adedipe. And over to you, Aderonke. She will introduce our speakers and our panelists and take it up from here. Thank you, Aderonke.
Thank you, Pranami. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Aderonke Alex Adedipe. And brief introduction. We all know that agriculture has always played a major role in the Nigerian economy. And SMEs and MSMEs also contribute largely to this sector. But one of the biggest challenges for these businesses is access to funding. And we recognize that, of course, businesses always require funding for growth and expansion. Traditional banks are often a no-go area because of the high interest rates and the high requirements. Now, despite these challenges, some businesses are thriving within the sector. So today I'm going to have the panelists speak to us about their experiences and what they're doing to generally navigate this terrain. I would like for the panelists to very briefly introduce themselves and also talk to us about basically just tell us what their businesses are about. So Sholakwe, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Aderonke. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure being here. My name is Sholakwe Akipelu, and I'm the co-founder CEO of Harvest. Harvest is an inclusive financial services. For women, we basically give financially excluded and financially underserved women greater access to financial services as savings, impact investments, credit, and our credit particularly goes to smallholder female farmers. Ronke had said a brief word. I would have just loved to emphasize that smallholder female farmers make up about 70% of the total rural labor population for agriculture in Nigeria and about 40% globally. But interestingly, they only get access to about 10% of structured funding. And that is why we consider what we do an important and necessary task. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you, Sholakwe. Kenneth, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Agrico?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kenneth Obiajulu. CEO of Agricop Holdings Limited. And so primarily Agricop is a cultivation, aggregation, processing, and export company based out of Nigeria. Currently expanded to Zambia, and we'll be moving to the DRC by the end of the year. Our mandate is very simple, to strengthen African food systems. We have seen the challenges that a lot of African countries face when it comes to working together on solving the food security issues that we envisage will be happening sometime in the future. So our job is basically and primarily to be able to connect the dots, work across various African countries, export some of the experiences and know-how that we have operating out of Nigeria and the other regions, and then seeing how we're able to collaborate to solve these problems together. So yeah, briefly, that's Kenneth, and that's what Agricop does.
Thank you, Kenneth. Perhaps at some point, your businesses can collaborate and see how you can resolve the potential food crisis in Nigeria. But Sholakwe, I know that you had previously worked in, the financial services sector. Can you tell us what was your motivation really to establish Harvest? Why did you decide to establish Harvest? What was your motivation?
I would say firstly, before working in financial services, I was actually in marketing and marketing financial brands. Was building products, pushing to markets for banks, insurance companies, various financial services sectors or subs, as you put it. And, there was a recurring decimal while doing all of this before I even became head of marketing at an investment conglomerate, as we put it, precisely Meristem. And it was the low adoption, of financial services by women. At the basic level, especially when you consider banking, you still see some close to some, I wouldn't say impressive, but you see some adoption by women. But when you start looking at insurance, asset management, wealth management, and all of that, it became like a luxury for women. And that was what really motivated, us to start Harvest. Interestingly, because a lot of people had said, oh, Harvest is catering to, underbanked and underserved. We realized quickly that the challenge was particularly more pronounced with, underfunded, with excluded women. And when we looked at women, we're looking at rural women, they are usually agrarian. As I mentioned earlier, getting 10% of funding, basically not because they cannot, they do not have the skills, not because they do not have the head or heart knowledge in agriculture, but because of the lack of what I call social permission, right? So a lot of women are considered, even while working on the fields of their husbands or their partner spouses, it's considered like an extension of their wifely duties. So it wasn't considered as a full-time job or as a business. And so all of these were underwhelming, the chances of the female farmers, and in extension, underwhelming the entire sector itself. So that was why we decided to first off, narrow in and ensure that we offer blended financing to these smaller female farmers. And in blended financing, what we offer them is first of all, upgrading skills and in training. So we extend training, then we extend funding, and then we connect them to premium markets.
Okay, thank you very much for that brief word, Sholakwe. Kenneth, given your background in the agricultural sector, how would you rate availability and, just general access to funding do you believe that there's financial support or there's sufficient support even from the private sector, either by way of debt or equity or mezzanine funding? What do you think?
So I think it's very broad, and I smile because I don't care. You know where my head is when it comes to these things. So firstly, I think that the agricultural space is different, from every other space. One, it involves a whole lot of factors of production, right? In some businesses, you have a blend of one or two, but in terms of agriculture, it just cuts across every single one of it, and it requires a whole lot of effort. Two, a lot of the financial institutions, if I'm to narrow it down to Nigeria, do not understand the space. As such, they would utilize the same credit appraisal systems that they use for credits for real estate, oil and gas. They will use the same systems to be able to appraise agricultural projects and investments, which in all of its in its entirety will fall on its head. Three, it is a medium to long-term kind of structure. As such, there is no way around having short investments or having funds that are mismatched. So that being said, is there availability of funding? Generally, yes. But in terms of meeting with the criteria to be able to draw down on them, that in itself becomes the problem. And private sector is really playing a crucial role, and there's also been a lot of innovations around the agricultural space or continuum, and we have seen that yes, in the short term it works, but because, like I said, agriculture is very medium to long term. It requires patient capital. It requires people that understand that these investments are required for a longer period of time. Issues around food security is not about what do I do now and get returns now. It's about how do I invest. It's a typical definition of how you plant a tree, and it takes years for you to be able to get the returns, when you are planting a tree, literally. So availability of finance, yes. Access to finance, that's a different ballgame entirely, but we're beginning to see a lot of innovative products coming into the market to see how they're able to solve these issues. Like, what I personally believe in, the principle of disruptive innovation, where when there is a scarcity or limitation in one factor of production, innovation will take place to optimize the use or availability of the existing factors of production. And we're beginning to see it. For example, if labor is very expensive, you begin to see innovations play around the use of mechanization or the use of robotics and the like to be able to optimize the use of the labor that is now scarce. If land is scarce, for example, rather than you see people build bungalows, you begin to see high rises come up because you need to utilize the available scarce resource. Capital is also one of those things as well, where when there is a scarcity of capital or access to finance, structured finance from traditional institutions, innovation would also take place to ensure that there are ways around, ensuring that, the finance will be made available to ensure that the system works and the industry works. But generally, that's my perspective about is finance available, what are the challenges, and how do we move from there?
Okay, so Kenneth, a key takeaway from what you just said is the fact that there's availability, right? But there's a lack of understanding. So traditionally, businesses, institutions, whether private or public, who provide financing to the agricultural sector are thinking of it as though, or they're financing or providing these funds as though they're providing financing to any other business, right? So there's a gap because there's a lack of understanding. What do you think can be done to close that gap? Do you think that perhaps more awareness? Do you think, because again, what I see to be a challenge. I'm not an expert in agriculture, but what I do see to also be a challenge, even in this part of the world, is, you know, agriculture sometimes is looked down on as, oh, it's just farming. What are they really doing? So perhaps the level of education there is not, we lack sophistication in that regard. So do you think that maybe there needs to be more awareness? I don't know. What do you think can be done to close that gap?
So I think there's no straightjacket solution to it. But what I feel is the first thing that is very important is those that accredit agricultural finance must be trained in how agriculture works. Simple, bottom line, right? And must understand how the system flows. You know, hence it's a waste of our time. Secondly, the structure of how agriculture is in Nigeria and Africa generally must also change. You know, like Sholakwe would say, smallholder farmers represent a huge chunk, you know, of the farmers engaged in agriculture. So about 70 to 80% of the farmers in Nigeria fall under that structure, and they cultivate on 1 hectare or less. And the rest of it is shared between middle-scale farmers and then large-scale farmers. You know, and with the typical characteristics of smallholder farmers, they practice subsistence farming, which is farming for themselves to eat, and then what is left, they sell. That is incomplete. That's the opposite of what food security is all about, you know, or what commercial farming is all about, where you cultivate to sell, what is left you eat, you know. And so in building a structure for financing agriculture, first, the orientation of agriculture being a culture must change. It must move from that to being a business, right? Secondly, we must also ensure that the kind of funding that are available, right, are structured in such a way that it helps to bring out the farmers from that level where they are operating at, you know, to the next level, you know. And three, it must be done in such a way that we're moving farther away from raw materials as our output. You know, we focus for so long on funding farmers to just produce XYZ commodities and that's it. No value addition, nothing whatsoever. You know, and as such, we'll always receive the smallest part of the pie. You know, as industrialists or commercially minded people will say, the closer you are to the farmer, the poorer you are. The farther away you are from the farmer, closer to the plate, the more money you make. Because at value addition levels, that's where the money is. So funding for agriculture primarily has been going into the primary side of the production, where anything that can go wrong will go wrong. You know, and that's how agriculture is. You wake up today and then you see that Cameroon or Niger or any of those countries decided to just open their dams, right? And then poof, the entire rice fields in the middle belt and, you know, the agrarian economy in itself is completely wiped out. You know, you wake up one morning and there is tuta absoluta, right, tomato Ebola, and it wipes out more than 60 to 70% of the yields of the farmers. You know, so at the very primary side of things, primary production side of things in agriculture, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. You know, but the further you move into the value addition part of things, you begin to see that your margins, the business in itself begins to make commercial sense. You're no longer making margins of between 3 to 10%. Margins are moving in excess of 25% and above. You know, and that's where even when things go wrong, you're able to mitigate and, you know, spread that risk, you know, or absorb that risk, you know, more than proportionate to if you're just producing. So the entire orientation about agriculture must change. You know, I see someone in the comment section saying something about availability of DFI funding from AFDB and all of that. These things sound great on paper. We've been in this space for too long to understand that we have a lot of funding on paper. You know, as a matter of fact, if you were to appraise Nigeria against almost every other country in terms of agriculture and the kind of policies and financing policy that we have, we're doing so great. From CACs to Ag SMEs to Ag Cobora program to, you know, name it. We have all the policies on paper that can work. But when it comes to the true implementation of things, it becomes a completely different ballgame entirely. And so I think these are some of the things that need to change. And these are some of the areas that we are pushing for to ensure that we're able to meet these goals. Yeah.
Okay, so Kenneth, your concluding remark takes me to the next question, which is, I mean, we've heard so much about how both past governments, present governments, and even the future leaders, right? Everybody who's in politics today is talking about how they're going to change the face of agriculture. And yes, I also hear you. We've also heard the CBN talk about the Anchor borrowing program. We've heard about NERSAL. We've heard about so many schemes. But I also hear you say that, you know, those policies are fantastic on paper. What do you identify to be the real issue here? Is it a case of lack of political will? Is it a case of there's just a difficulty for farmers or businesses in the agricultural sector to meet the criteria? What exactly is the issue? And how do you think that the government can do better to actualize these schemes and not just, not just giving out these incentives on paper? What do you think can be done?
I think I'll also allow Sholakwe to bring in some input here, but just before that, first, my assessment of these policies are largely from a point of prior to starting up Agriculture, we didn't just jump into entrepreneurship because there were no jobs. We were working in structured environments, and we have been a part of the system. Gates Foundation to the World Bank, to working with developmental projects that work with state governments, work with CBN, work with NISA, on structuring these kinds of policies. So in designing the policies, they are great. The biggest problem is implementation. It's not about the lack of political will. I think if anything, I'm being very careful not to dabble into political conversations because the environment is already heated. But if anything, right, if there's one thing I can give to this present administration, is the fact that they pumped a huge amount of resources into agriculture, right? Whether those resources brought about the desired results, that's a different conversation entirely. But the policies were very apt. But for the very first time, we saw farmers smile to the bank. We saw availability of financing, even though there was a huge chunk of those financing going to political cronies, and not enough going to the farmers themselves, the actual farmers themselves. We've seen issues around rice sufficiency. In 2016, the import bill for rice in Nigeria was over 775,000 metric tons. When we shut down the borders, for 2017, the numbers dropped to 75,000 tons of rice. It means that the excess or the gap was produced in Nigeria, although the prices went up. But it showed that we had the capacity to produce. And now the issue became, how do we increase the yields of the farmers such that we reduce the yield, we increase the yield, reduce post-harvest losses, and then the pricing can now come down. We saw over how many multinational organizations start investing in the processing side of rice. Millions of dollars came in to start processing rice in Nigeria. There was even a delegation that was led by the Thailand government, because Thailand was the biggest player in the rice market globally because of Nigeria. So these policies were very, very good. But in terms of the implementation to the very end to bring about the desired results, that's where the whole thing is. So I think beyond political will, it's also having the right set of people to drive all of these things home, working with farmers and not just saying, hey, take this amount of money, produce what you can produce, right? We need to be able to get them out of producing on 1 hectare of land rice. My average yield, I've been having an average yield of 3 metric tons per hectare, 4 metric tons per hectare, and I'm fine with it. I don't want to hear anything. My great-grandparents have been cultivating for 100 years. I've been doing this for 50 years. Don't tell me anything new. But there are new technologies and new systems that can increase the yield. Because with food security, it falls across 4 pillars. Food must be available, food must be accessible, food must be fit for use, and all of these things must be done sustainably. Availability comes from a point of ensuring that for every 1 hectare, you must produce the maximum amount of output to ensure that we have fully utilized that land resource and that financial input that has gone in there. Why should we be producing 4 metric tons per hectare, when in comparable countries closer to us, they are doing about 10 metric tons, 7 metric tons, 9 metric tons, 12 metric tons. So these are the issues that we need to start tackling, and we need to get a lot more youth involved in agriculture because they understand the science, they understand where the money is. All we need to now do is ensure that we are pushing them in the right direction, showing them that agriculture is not as crude and backward as what people have been saying. As a matter of fact, you can make more money in agriculture than working over the pages of WhatsApp or on your laptops doing a couple of things. So I think these are some of the things that we need to change. The orientation must change. The youth must be involved a lot more in agriculture. That's a game changer, and we must start looking for how these things can work.
Thank you, Kenneth. That was very insightful. So, Sholakwe, I'm going to ask you, so based on your experience in harvest, having invested in female farmers, do you have, I heard you make a point about how, dealing with farmers in the rural areas, particularly these women they're not business oriented, they're not business focused. They're just doing this as part of their obligations as a wife or as a mother. Do you think, are there any specific recommendations that you would like to make in which you think that the government can intervene to assist female farmers? So e.g., for example, areas of perhaps land acquisition. I imagine that in some rural parts of Nigeria, it might be a taboo for a woman to actually acquire land, or things like even access to produce, fertilizer, equipment, farmer education, business education. Do you think that, there are certain policies or there are certain, steps that the government can take to target women in these areas?
All right, thank you so much, Aderonke, and I'll answer that, but let me just lean into the questions you asked, Kenneth. It is one that affects farmers generally, and of course, even affects the female farmers more, given the gap in mindsets, which answers your question. There's a need for mindset shift, and then given the awareness levels of these women, just to contextualize, I got to a point where when people send me links on WhatsApp or, on messengers to say, oh, there's this newly approved fund, I'll say, thank you, but please quit sending me this. Because really, as Kenneth said, we have a lot of paper money, we have a lot of, posturing, funds moving around on paper. And then when it gets to actual disbursement or actual implementation of those policies, of those funds, it's the conversation changes. And this is even prevalent in the public sector, but in the private sector, where you see some will, where you see some interventions, especially from the Apex Bank, you realize that, yes, it looks interesting. For instance, there's a particular financial institution that we've been speaking with for over 2 years now. And the last time someone wanted to get us to speak with them again, the reluctance was really huge, right? Because for every time we spend quality billable hours on the transaction, you do 3 months, and then when it comes to disbursement, you realize that, wait a minute, if I had all that you were asking for, I wouldn't even be at your table requesting for this money, because you are asking me for, quite a lot that I can liquidate and then, fund these projects with. So it's like setting a table and then making it almost impossible. I mean, setting a proper meal table and making it almost impossible to access the meal for its intended purpose, which is to nourish the system. So, or in the cases of DFIs, where you've seen some funds and the operational, maybe about 70% of the entire fund that you see reported out there is tied into the operations of the fund, right? So yes, someone quotes XX figure, as a grant or a non-dilutive, or, and then 70% of it goes into, the operations of the funds, logistics, salaries. And at the end of the day, you wonder, what is left to be actually disbursed. So we have, I'm a communication student, and then, there's this theory called agenda setting, and, you see quite a lot of that going on. And so, yes, for Harvest, one of the things that we've said is that to identify areas of influence and then our areas of control, we realize that assessing this fund is not within our area of control. However, our area of control are how we can make the most of, the funds that we have, make the most of the resources, that we have internally. And that is where it aligns with what Kenneth said, to say, maximizing the potentials, maximizing every unit of input, and ensuring that it gives the most optimal outputs. So having said that, given your question, what can government do, especially, with lifting the participations of women farmers within the ecosystem? You actually answered that, and I was just smiling. I said that Aderonke should be on this side. Yes, a lot of, mindset shifting, as I said. Excuse me, please. Apologies, please. Yes, as I was saying, mindset shifting, because you realize that without the right mindset, you'll be surprised that, the fund would not even get actualized or serve its intended purposes. Also, what I see, at least one of the major challenges we've recorded in, offering blended financing for female farmers is, first, of course, we know, because actually we still practice agriculture in a very traditional way. We've not moved to the scientific part of agriculture. We are practicing it as an art. And of course, in that present practice, land is key. Land is crucial, and with land rights or some cultural laws that prohibit women from inheriting lands from their parents in some parts of the country, or maybe even from their husbands. What that does is that the field is no longer a level. The playing field is not equalized, because where a male would require X amount, the female would require X plus 1 amount, factoring in the cost of accessing land. So those are some things that I think policies can come into influencing land ownership rights. Having intended vehicles, having structured vehicles to help women get greater knowledge in agronomy practices and in business. And that's what Harvest does. At a point, we had to even digitalize all of this and make it a VAS where women can dial a code. And right there, you see, across the crop value chains that we focus on, which is rice and maize now, you see updated agronomic practices there. You see financial literacy, because a lot of them, they are, they are, how do I put this? They are not exactly financially aware. So there are some forms of credit that they've involved themselves in, and you're wondering how, even if their yield gives them the most, there's no way they were going to pay off. But they do not essentially understand the breakdown of the type of credit they got. And so what it does is that they get stuck between selling off at the first price and not at competitive prices, just to pay off a loan that essentially they cannot even pay off. Therefore, even digging deeper below the poverty line. So you realize that with core financial literacy at their levels, which can be upgraded as time passes, insurance schemes that, covers even for their, because, personal wellness is essentially is key. If a farmer, for instance, who is doing everything traditionally cannot go because there's just, she has malaria, or a child, and, in these cases, they are usually primary caregivers, or a child is not feeling well and there's no insurance, there's so many things. It's at risk to the crops on the field. So there are many interventions that can be women focused. And aside from just having this policy set aside, can be easily implemented through vehicles, through organizations like ours, and other amazing organizations out there who are looking at ensuring that we lift participations for female, especially smallholder female farmers, to ensure food security.
Okay, Sholape, just a quick one, flowing from what you said. I know that Harvest uses technology, right, within the value chain. How exactly are you using this technology to provide services within the agricultural value chain? And I also hear you say, something around, the little details like healthcare, insurance for the women, information, farmers' education. How at Harvest, can you just tell me very briefly how you guys are able to plug in, or perhaps maybe you're partnering with other companies or other organizations to be able to provide these services to women? And is it just for is this specific to the farmers in the rural areas, or is it also accessible and open to other farmers, even, in this part of Nigeria?
Okay, yeah. Firstly, farming, especially the production level, happens majorly in rural areas. And so, as we say at Harvest, we say we are not leaving any woman, behind. And so, how do we leverage on technology? First, the impact investment happen, on our mobile application. So it is a peer-to-peer, member-only cooperative where women and allies, as we call it in gender mainstreaming, allies are men who are interested, in supporting women, in supporting parity, come together and decide to pull funds together, which can be impact invested in the smallholder female farmers who are part of the cooperative as well. So all of that is enabled via the mobile app, which is available on iOS and Android. And what we've realized, I think Kenneth mentioned that, is also we looked again at our strategy and looked at where we have more women in the value chain, and knowing fully well that we cannot limit to the production system. So you have more women in processing, for instance, you have more women in distribution and marketing. So I think it was just this week that we decided. Now we rolled out, not decided because we've been working on it for a while now, that we rolled out such that you can not only, impact invest in just the production, just production alone, but look at, they can now impact invest in the women traders, in the women who are processing, because we have a lot more women who feel empowered there, who would not want to naturally, go into production. And you realize that, I am holding on to that the farther you move away from the field, the richer you are in agriculture. So that way, as an organization, it also helps us, de-risks, and then we are able to expand the solution to more women. So yes, we know and realize that these women are not generally digitally savvy. So yes, yourself, myself, people on this call who have an internet-enabled device, at least that's what's powering a conversation like this, on the Harvest application, impact investing in these women, having their savings plans and all of that. We had to use a USSD, solution to for those women, such that aside from, them getting access to credit, it is measurable, it is traceable. So for instance, their disbursement of credit over time helps them have digital financial footprints, where it now makes them fundable by bigger financial, institutions, because again, a lot of these financial institutions, either in the public or private, they have funds, as we mentioned earlier, that are there, but they cannot allocate. They want to allocate, but they cannot allocate because of the, large and multiple hoops that people have to go through. But with a history, of credits that has been given, that has been paid back, that is documented, that is digitalized, it makes it easier for those funds to be unlocked. And so that way it's a win-win. The funds can be unlocked. The women or, the beneficiaries from a platform, the funded people can access that. And so all of this is powered, by technology, yes, with great intent.
Well done, Sholakwe. That's very interesting to hear. Well done. So flowing from that, right? So with this new CBN cashless policy, and I'll give you a very brief example. About a week ago, there's a guy I usually order chicken suya from. So I was going to make my usual order. And I said to him, oh, give me 10 packs of chicken suya. And he said, madam, there's no suya, or there's no chicken in the market because there's no cash. I said, so what if I do a transfer to you? He said, oh, no, that no one is going to take it from him because blah, blah, blah. Anyway, bottom line, I didn't get my chicken. And I've also heard people say in recent times that, oh, I went to the market, people are collecting transfer these days for F4 and Ugu or whatnot. But I mean, given that, majority of the unbanked, right, they're located within the rural areas, how do you think this new policy would impact those farmers and their businesses? Would you say that it's about time? Because I hear you say, some of them they use a USSD code, right, to be able to access some of this funding. So would you say that it's about time that farmers adjusted to this new reality? Or do you think that perhaps there's something somewhere that the government is not listening to? Or do they have something to say about the practicality or otherwise of this new policy and how it would impact their everyday business?
Yeah, well, first off, on the long run, on the long term, it would significantly, help, like I mentioned, when you can trace and have your transactions within a system, it's easier to unlock a lot for you. You can be easily vetted, traced, but when everything happens in an informal system, yes, you have done, but you said it, no one can trace the cash. It's probably maybe written on an ajo paper that got rumpled, or someone got into a rain or someone, misplaced it. So on the long term, I see good intentions. But do we have enough infrastructure to support this? That's another conversation. Secondly, again, talking about reorientation and, educating people generally about these policies, there are some gaps that I feel can be plugged there, especially when you're looking at people. If you see the people who are mostly frustrated are people who are living in remote areas, or what you call like peri-urban areas. Because again, all of these policies, it's too much English. Do you understand? I need to make sales. Okay, so I'll cite an example. I said I was going to, write about that. I went to the open market the other day. I think it was Ewedu jute leaf I wanted to buy about for 500 naira or so. And then the naira I had, because they've not, it was still the old one. I think this happened like three weeks ago. And I offered to, the seller. It was really bad, actually, the quality of the notes. and they said they were not getting it. Of course, everybody was frustrated. This is cash that is now the new gold, and you're not going to collect this. And I said, but you're going to take it to the bank. And the lady did this, and what that means, like, God forbid, I said, and she said to me, her tone changed, and she said, we don't take money to bank. God forbid that we take funds to the bank, we take funds to the markets. I now had to ask other people. They now said that, taking money to the bank for a market woman is you saying that maybe our business is halting, that they are meant to be turning that fund over, right? Make sales go, So saving and having money in the bank is not something that a market woman really looks forward to. And so what I'm saying is that there is a huge gap between these policies, between the policymakers and the people we are actually directing or intending these policies for. And so there are just so many opportunities and gaps to be plugged, especially because if you say you are doing something and it's in my favor, and I do not see it, and I've not been convinced in any way, I'll see you as the enemy. And I think those are that's one of the challenges we are having on ground. But if well implemented, it's going to, help rural people largely, unlock greater opportunities.
Thank you, Sholakwe. Well, for one, I find it difficult to comprehend how they're going to be able to, help the unbanked, especially when you consider factors like electricity. Are these people able to charge their phones? If there are no physical banks in those areas, how are they able to, where do they save their money? How do they get their money? I don't know. I guess it's a huge question. And just like you said, there's a huge gap. It does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of orientation. So I'm going to move back to Kenneth. Kenneth, I know you had mentioned that, Agricole is currently in Nigeria, currently in Zambia, and currently looking to expand into the DRC markets. I believe that, for you to be considering those markets, there are certain attractions there for you. And let me ask you in this context, when you compare policies of other African countries with those of Nigeria, right, in terms of agriculture, would you say that there are certain changes that the government can make, especially to attract foreign investments into the country, as far as agriculture is concerned?
Yes, I think the policies are very different. For example, in Zambia, I work out of Zambia, Lusaka now, and the last few months has been amazing. Walk into the office of the minister, sit at the reception, and I want to see the minister, right? And in 10 minutes, 30 minutes, you'll get to see the minister if you have an appointment, not the PA to the PA, right? You meet the minister, and then you present your plans, and they ask you, what can the government do for you? How can we make this more attractive for you, right? How can we ensure that you're able to project and, create more jobs for our people? So yes, the political undertone in other parts of Africa, I'm not saying they are not there, but it's a little bit, it's not as, we're not pressured as much, as we are in Nigeria. So the policies outside of Nigeria, they work, and where they don't work, it's easier for you to be able to have a sit down and discuss, what's, for example, we didn't need to apply to this, to that, to be able to get exemptions, to be able to bring in capital equipment. We didn't have to settle one custom officer, blah, 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 to be able to, we didn't need to speak so much English. So yes, a lot of the times it makes a lot more sense, operating out of Nigeria, and these are things that we need to start working on. And we're praying that the government is able to live up to these expectations, because it becomes easier for you to be able to attract investments. The last 12 to 18 months, we've been trying to raise capital in Nigeria, for our expansion. 2020, we raised some significant amount of money, but we've been trying to expand, but it's been super difficult. Investors don't trust the political terrain, they don't trust the economic terrain. We got term sheets, and then 2 months after we got term sheets, the dollar went from this to this, correct? And then the investors send us 9 solid reasons why they have to hold on till May or July next year. And these are valid reasons, and now we're going to Hong Kong. We're raising money from Hong Kong, to be able to fund. And the conditions are very simple. Ensure that this money doesn't get to Nigeria, right? You have operations in Zambia, boost your Zambian operations. You want to get operations in the DRC. As bad as the DRC is, they're happy to put the money there. As bad as the DRC is in quotes, based on perception, they're willing to put the money there, and if you want to move some money to Nigeria, don't let it sit in Nigeria for more than 1 year or 2 years. Ensure that the movement of cash happens, you're moving it out or bringing it back in. These are the kinds of things that investors are telling you. And we're setting up structures in South Africa. We had no business in South Africa, but now we're trying to set up structures in South Africa to receive money that should have just been going directly to Nigeria. So it's pretty difficult, and these are the hoops that we need to always get around most of the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kenneth. Thank you. We have only a few more minutes. I'm just going to say that perhaps Sholakwe and Kenneth, you have one word, just one in 1 minute, one word of advice for, anyone who's intending to set up an agribusiness in Nigeria. One word of advice, please, in 1 minute.
All right. Yeah, basically, I'll just say that I think you said one word, 2. Can I just say 2, actually? That agribusiness is a profitable venture. And having said that, I think this is another converse fact. It's okay for, agriculture or maybe production especially to fail. What is not okay is data not rightly captured. And yes, there's a lot of volatility, which is why I mentioned what I mentioned the first time. However, these are things that can be plugged, if done right, and that can be controlled. Yes, and yes, basically that. And most importantly, join us on this Harvest side, where we are impacting and lifting participation for more underfunded women. Harvest is HERVEST, and it's available on iOS and Android.
Thank you, Sholakwe. Kenneth.
Okay, how can you tell me to say 1 word or 2 words? You're trying to restrict my mind. Okay, so advice on this side is, so the African food market is set to hit $1 trillion mark by 2030. These are numbers from the World Bank. So if I were to give an advice, it will come from my favorite quote in the book called Julius Caesar, written by William Shakespeare. And there was a point where Brutus was speaking to Cassius, and he said, "There is a tide in the affairs of all men. Taken at its height would lead to great fortune. Omitted, and the voyage of their lives are bound in miseries. Upon such a full sea, we are now afloat, and we must take each current as it serves, or we lose our ventures." Nigeria is at a critical point, in ensuring that we're able to meet with the mandate of food security for 2030. And those that would be able to play at that level will be those that have invested critically in building infrastructures now. So there's never been a better time to invest or get into agriculture, right? And my advice to anyone is collaborate as much as you can, partner with people to reduce the risk, the concentration risk, and do it, just do it. And always praying for everyone to ensure that you're on the higher side of things. Ground no level, depends on what you're standing on. So that's my advice to everybody, and wishing everybody success in their future endeavors.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for that insightful session. I do apologize. We're extremely behind time. We have 2 minutes to conclude this session, but I have a question that I would like either yourself or Sholakwe to answer. Kenneth, since you're still here, I'd allow you to answer this question. And the question reads, but to what extent would PPP benefit financing in the agri sector? Should we fully privatize funding? Is this sustainable considering the fact that we have heard that funding initiatives are mostly on paper?
So I think all structures work. The biggest problem is agriculture, and there are certain attractiveness that investors have towards certain kinds of investments, right? For example, tech will always take a huge chunk of investments, and like I tell people, agri-tech is not the same thing as agriculture. Agri-tech will never be 80% tech and 20% agriculture. It's the other way around. So PPPs would always work. There's a need for government to also invest, to ensure that infrastructures are required to be able to level private sector funding on, and private sector investors are not so comfortable putting their money in agriculture because there are other alternatives in the market, right? You look at revenue multiples or valuation multiples. SAS will give you 9.6x. Marketplace will give you 12.8x. E-commerce will give you 5.3x. Brick and mortar, which is where agriculture falls on that, will give you 1.7x. Why do I want to go and put my money there? Especially when the infrastructures have not been put in place. So I think that there is always a perfect blend for PPPs, where public spending is also going into ensuring that we have the necessary infrastructures to be able to cultivate, like land clearing, setting up of rural roads and road networks, and then private sector can now leverage on building on those infrastructures. Otherwise, we're going to be back to where everyone wants to invest in the techie side, which is the downstream side of agriculture. What is going to happen at the upstream side? Public funding must be able to unlock that. So yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, Sholakwe. Thank you, Kenneth, for that very insightful session. Perenami, would you like to take over from here, please?
Yes, I mean, thank you very much, Ronke. That was very well moderated. Thank you so much, Kenneth and Sholakwe. I don't know about the attendees, but every moment was so engaging for me. I think we can even spend another 1 hour here, but unfortunately we can't. Everyone has to get back to their day. So it was really insightful for me. I have loads of questions, I must say, that because I know that's how engaging it was for me, but I can take it offline. We don't have the time. So thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. Thank you for the insightful conversation. Thank you for everything. Thank you for taking time with us today. And to our attendees, thank you very much for sticking with us, for staying all through to the end. We have many more events and webinars lined up for the Agri Committee, and we will definitely keep you updated on that. I see a comment where people have asked how they can link up with both Kenneth and Sholakwe. What we will do is when we send out the recording or send out the post-webinar thank you notes, we will include their contacts if they permit us to do so. So thank you very much, everyone. I think that brings us to the end. Thank you to the NBA-SBL. Thank you to our chairperson, Endurance Rex. Thank you very much for being the perfect support host. So thank you, Ronke. Nothing more from me. I think we're done.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Bye. See you some other time.
Bye.